The Biden administration is concerned about the rise of digital surveillance by authoritarian regimes and is leading a global effort to clamp down on access to American technology. The effort will create a code of conduct for the U.S. and its allies to coordinate export licensing policies and increase control when technologies are exported from the U.S. Jennifer Hillman is a senior fellow for the Trade and International Political Economy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
So what's the real problem here that the Biden administration is trying to combat?
So the issue has been that the use of all kinds of digital technology. I mean, that includes surveillance technology, censorship over the internet, the ability to use artificial intelligence to process all kinds of data is effectively being used by authoritarian regimes to surveil, repress, and manipulate their own domestic populations and foreign populations as well. So again, generally referred to as digital authoritarianism is what they're really worried about.
And what's been the real impact of U.S. companies providing China or other authoritarian regimes with these technologies? I mean, can't China create their own?
Well, China is creating a lot of its own technology, but again, we have to go back a little bit in time to figure out how did China become such a large producer and creator of a lot of this technology. It was done on the backs of a lot of American and other Western technology that made its way into China. Some of it legally, where companies went ahead and invested and started producing in China, and their technology then got transferred over to their joint venture partners or others in China. But a fair amount of it was either just flat out stolen and or forced to be transferred over to Chinese companies. So a lot of our technology made its way into China, and then the Chinese companies used that technology to become huge, big, very competitive, very expansionary companies. I mean, Huawei and ZTE in the telecommunications area, Hikvision in their surveillance camera area. So a lot of the Chinese companies basically were built on the backs of Western technology. Nowadays, you still have Chinese companies that are still highly reliant on a lot of the Western technology, most especially for advanced semiconductors. So there is still pockets of high tech that the Chinese cannot produce themselves. They have to rely on imports coming in from the United States, Europe, Japan, and other Asian countries.
So do you think the Biden administration's plan to limit exports of American technology to China really will make a dent in China's human rights violations?
Well, that is clearly the hope and the expectation. And I think the Biden administration is going about it very intelligently because they're trying to do this not just the United States controlling the technology, but again, working with, Europeans and others to try to create a network of countries that would control the same technologies, that would control shipments to the same end of entities. So again, I think that is the hope and the goal. And again, coming out of, for example, this Summit for Democracy was a pact that included, the United States and Norway and Australia and others to join together to say commonly, we're going to go after controlling the technologies that can be used to do this kind of surveillance that is creating all of the problems.
I wanted to ask you about that Summit for Democracy. That took place earlier this month. China and Russia were not invited. What was the purpose of that meeting?
Well, clearly the purpose of the summit was to do a couple of things. One was to basically bring everyone together to try to come up with a common agenda to strengthen global democracies and democratic institutions. It was really organized around three basic themes. I mean, the goal was to try to come up with real action plans to defend against authoritarianism. That was one of the goals, to fight corruption, and thirdly, to promote a respect for human rights. So the idea was to bring together, again, governments, NGOs, private stakeholders, private companies to come up with clear sort of action plans on what are we going to do to address kind of these three goals. And to me, you saw two real commitments coming out of the summit. I mean, one was a commitment by the United States to spend on what is referred to as the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal, $424 million to support independent news outlets, combat corruption, aid activists, advance technology, defend fair elections. So again, American spending to try to promote democracy and respect for human rights abroad. The second thing that came out of it was this area of export controls. Export controls and human rights initiative, again, designed to combat this digital authoritarianism that we've just talked about through greater export controls of technology that can empower surveillance states. And again, this is a compact with the United States, Australia, Denmark, and Norway, with the hope that others will join and become part of this initiative.
All right. Well, Jennifer, thank you very much. We'll continue to watch and see what happens. I appreciate you being on the program.
Terrific. Thank you for having me.